Way up north,
North to Alaska,
way up north,
north to Alaska, north to Alaska. I go north, the rush is on. North to Alaska, I go north, the rush is on.
Call the meeting to order. First order of business is approval.
It's that simple, huh?
Yep, okay, we're ready.
That's how Tom calls it.
Marty, I'm going to move the TV camera around so you can see everybody. We have 3/4 of a room.
Yeah, looks like you got a good group.
Yeah. You got a guy in the front eating ribs and driving everybody crazy.
Having supper.
Having supper.
Now, our
Well,
barbecue season is just about over. I think we got about another week, and then we're just gonna have to wrap up our barbecue for the year.
where do you guys barbecue in Alaska?
Salmon probably.
Well, you know, everything from salmon to steaks.
Yeah, a lot of salmon.
Seal.
Oh yeah, tons of salmon. And of course, most of the people get their fish here from fish wheels. So instead of going into the river and fishing, they share a time with a fish wheel that goes in, the end of May and then comes out early August. And, you know, for $10 a year, you can get like 300 red salmon, 150 kings, way more fish than you could ever eat in a year. But they've been doing that for a long, long time. So you put the fish wheel in, and when you caught enough fish for one day, you just put a pin in it to stop it from spinning. And then, you know, usually they're shared. And, you know, there might be 3 or 4 groups of people sharing the fish wheel. And, you know, they just bring in thousands of fish that way.
Yeah. Back a long time ago when I was in radio, I interviewed a governor of a city way up on the top of Alaska where they only have sunlight like 6 or 8 weeks out of the year. And they go out, they have whaling parties. And once a year, the whole city goes out, drags a whale up and goes nuts.
Yeah, so they do that up in Barrow and
Barrow, that's right.
Yeah. So yeah, they go out on their whaling expeditions, and every year they bring in whales. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I'd like to introduce you, Marty, to the Fond du Lac Amateur Radio Club. And members, this is Marty Karjala. He is the HAARP, and it's HAARP. He's the research site supervisor. And Marty, we thank you so much for being with us today.
Glad to be there.
All right. First of all, let's learn a little about you. How did you get involved with this? Because it's really HAARP, the way it looks, has only been around since 1993.
Yeah. So back in 1989, I went to work for a company on Project Elf, which most of you are familiar with. One facility being in Clam Lake, Wisconsin, which is where I started at the Clam Lake facility. And then I went back home to where I'm from in the Upper Peninsula, and I worked at the Republic Project Elf facility for 12 years. Prior to that, I was in the Navy. I got out as an electronics technician in 1985. And for 4 years after I got out, I worked for a telecommunications company in the Upper Peninsula, Range Telecommunications.
Mm-hmm.
But I just got a feeling while I was working at Project Elf that it was not going to be there forever. I was the lead electronics technician, and some of the equipment that I was trying to order for spare parts and so forth, the Navy just didn't want to order them. And so after a little period of time, I thought, you know, it looks like they're going to close ELF down. And so I started looking for work, and of course I found this job. At the time, there wasn't any thought of the money coming together to grow it out to what it is. So for many years, HAARP was a 9-acre, 48 element array. But a couple of years after I got up here, I came up here in the spring of 2001. About 2 years later, all the money came together between the Air Force Research Lab, the Naval Research Lab, and DARPA. So they pooled their money, and we spent the later part of 2003, all of 2004, 2005, and 2006 to build the array to what it is right now. Of course, that also included increasing the size of our power plant. And for all of you in the ham club down there, if you're ever in Alaska and you get a chance to visit us, come on up here. I'd like to give you a tour of the facility. It's quite large. The Air Force back in January of 1989 bought 5,400 acres of land from the local native tribe here. And of course, they were building the facility to be a over-the-horizon backscatter radar, just to look at the Russian horizon during the Cold War. And so they constructed the main building, part of the infrastructure on site, and did the surveying to put in the massive HF array for the over-the-horizon radar system. And then at the end of the Cold War, of course, that the program just got shut down. And the people that were working were just told to pack up their lunches and go home. So the main operations center building really wasn't completed until the year 2000. And much of the operations of the prototype array and the 48 element array were done out of these ATCO trailers. And so then in 2000, they moved out of those trailers into the main operations center. And there's just been a lot of growth. You know, we have a wide variety of instrumentation on site, space weather monitoring equipment, and some special sensors, magnetometers, and so forth. So it is a world-class HF ionospheric research facility, and it's pretty impressive. So like I said, for any of you that ever plan on visiting Alaska, we'd appreciate it if you stop in so we can give you our grand tour.
Marty, are you guys still hooked up with the University of Alaska? Or are you on your own?
Yeah. So we, in the summer of 2015, the Air Force Research Lab provided a cooperative research and agreement just to take over the facility. The Air Force had looked for several years to find an entity that could actually afford it. So to their credit, they did take a good long time, and finally our director at the Geophysical Institute stepped up, and here we are. So we went through 4 different contractors over the years, and then had a temporary 2-year contract that was transitional, so that the Air Force could transfer the property and all of the equipment to the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Go ahead.
Why was Alaska chosen out of all the states? Was it because of the not so dense population, or because of the university?
Well, there were a few things to consider at the time. Some of the experimenters, the scientists, they like to have the auroral oval nice and thick above the facility, but many of the experiments, we don't want the aurora. So we really have the best of both worlds. For those that really like a nice thick auroral oval, we get that at times, and then of course other times we've got no aurora overhead. But between the Air Force and the Navy, they looked at 20 different facilities in the northern states, most of them in Alaska. And because the Air Force already owned this property, and they had done a environmental impact statement, record of decision on that statement, and they had part of the infrastructure here. All three branches decided it's best to go to Tacoma. Initially, there was a group on the committee that really wanted to go on the North Slope, purely for the natural gas, for the power production. So they were outvoted just because Daytona has the best of both worlds. We've got aurora, we've got conditions when there's no aurora, and typically when we plan science campaigns, they can be anywhere from 4 or 5 days to 2 or 3 weeks long. The longer the period, the better, because we have scientists that may just want to look at artificial aurora, so they need clear skies. Whereas others are just looking at perturbating different parts of the overhead ionosphere. So the ionospheric conditions need to be correct as well. So over these long periods of time, one scientist might only find 2 or 3 days in a 2-week period, but at least he will get some data in the period, the science campaign period.
Yeah. Out of all the years that you've been in operation, what are some of your major accomplishments up there in RF?
Well, the biggie was being able to find out where the sweet spot is overhead to create this artificial aurora or air glow. So, when we take a look at the electromagnetic environment of the universe, or more closely on a planetary scale, all of the spheres are held within a magnetosphere, right? It's like a bar magnet where you've got your magnetic field lines going out one end, going 9 Earth radii into outer space and then coming back to the other pole. So within the magnetosphere, we've got all of our spheres, right? We've got the thermosphere holding the upper half of our atmosphere. We've got the different layers of the ionosphere that, of course, change from day to night, season to season. And all of our spheres, of course, are dominated by whatever our star does. But when you take a look at the different spheres, here where we are in the troposphere, the thin layer of stratosphere above it, the small layer of mesosphere above that, and then our varying spheres of ionosphere, these are regions that were starved of data. It's not like we can go up in a balloon or stick a sensor there. So whatever interactions we have with the ionosphere are primarily with high frequencies. And so we're looking at the FOF2 region, looking at what its height is and some of its fundamental parameters as the tides are moving in the plasma up there. So there's a number of studies that we do. There's a number of conditions that have to be right to make the science come together. But as I mentioned, we're starved of data. So whenever we interact, heating, our facility is called an ionospheric heater, just like the one in Sura, Russia, Tromsø, Norway, Arecibo, and Puerto Rico. So we're heating the plasma up there, but the information that we're extracting are all ground-based receivers or receivers and sensor systems that are on satellites that we time in conjunction with their passing through just over that region above us, then we're stimulating it. So a wide variety of scientific studies, and it all comes back to man will never be able to measure what's in a cubic meter, right? And it doesn't matter if that cubic meter is in the earth, in the water, in the troposphere, or in space. So the electromagnetic environment that we have, we cannot measure, right? When you take a look at all the different signals coming from all different directions, including the Schumann resonances, VLF frequencies that tend to want to hug the Earth's magnetic field lines. When we look at the electromagnetic environment, we can only surmise what models can tell us and what we can directly or indirectly measure. So we cannot measure the electromagnetic environment and a cubic meter, and a cubic centimeter, and a cubic picometer, right? There's no way of measuring that. When you try to clamp currents or try to probe potentials, you're changing their configuration. So we humans will never be able to measure what's in the electromagnetic environment, but we're trying to figure out how things work, going up, coming down, moving sideways, right? So we're looking at particle matter in the ionosphere. We are stimulating it or heating it to take a look at the structures that are created temporarily and the mechanisms that make them happen. So there's a lot of different sciences in the geophysical sciences. You've got atmospheric chemistry, you've got the physicists, you've got the PhD electrical engineers, and they're all looking to gain knowledge of our spheres above us, and particularly how the ionosphere interacts with, one of our studies is polar aeronomy, which is the study of upper atmospheric physics and radio science. So we look at, what conditions cause super long communications with certain HF frequencies. We're looking at penetrating the medium because we have so many satellites with satellite to ground-based communication circuits. So we're always looking for ways to improve the communication medium.
Matt, with,
Sorry.
when you
Just stop.
when you consider all of the broadcast transmitters in the world, there's probably 1 trillion watts of power going up.
Right.
Are we as mankind actually, are we raising the temperature of the ionosphere with what we're doing in our broadcast?
No. And when you take a look at, as we go higher above our troposphere, above where we live, the actual molecular matter becomes rarefied, stratified, until you get up to the plasma, where we're looking at atomic particles. We're looking at the interaction of plasmas, right? So the particle matter is so far and few in between. It's like trying to heat a big metal griddle with the back of your hand, right? So, it doesn't work. So there's not enough particles, not enough molecular matter up above the regions that we're studying to have any effect within our troposphere.
Okay, well, let's talk a little about hardware. In our last newsletter, we printed a whole bunch of pictures showing the fantastic antenna array that you guys got out there. Can you explain a little bit about it?
Right. So, one of the things building on permafrost is that, it's difficult. At the top of these towers, they're up about 68 feet. We need them to be within a 1/4 inch of vertical. And so whenever you chop down the dwarf black spruce, which is predominantly what's growing on the permafrost, then you accelerate the permafrost depreciation. So there's only a couple of ways that you can overcome having your towers tilt over or just wobbling around in the muck. And one of them is with thermal siphons. So this is technology that the pipeline has been using for quite some time. So we have 180 towers plus the perimeter towers. These are 30-foot, 14-inch, or 16-inch encased steel sections that we drill holes after everything's frozen. November into December, all the holes were drilled. So then we had 16 big donuts that held them precisely in place. So these thermal siphons are dropped into the earth 30 feet, and then a slurry mix with sand and water is poured in. And once 50% of that perimeter was frozen, we could remove the holding donuts, and we had 16 of those. We could go 16 at a time. So everything got frozen in place, and then it's assembly, piece by piece by piece, bringing up the antennas and getting all the cabling, all of the controls, everything in place, a lot of welding, aluminum welding. You take a look at the array, each tower is guide to its neighbor. So when you do adjustments on one tower, you're actually adjusting your neighbors. So it's quite an intricate alignment procedure to go through 180 towers and get them all aligned. But we need them to be within 1/4 inch of vertical at the top. And of course, the suspension of the antenna elements have to be just right. So when you go from, say, 65 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit to 80 degrees above Fahrenheit, you've got roughly a 6-inch loop or a 6-inch circle that your antenna element has to remain in. So to get all of your fundamental transmit characteristics to work just right, of course your element has to be right. And so you go through these temperatures where you'll go out and see everything just tight as a drum at 50 below 0, and then relaxed in the summertime. So pretty intricate design.
Yeah, I'm gonna redial you, okay? I'm gonna call you.
There it is. He's there.
Go back.
Guys, I'm not gonna touch this. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so our internet is not the best here. You know, we've only got a 10/1, and that's as good as we get. So that might be the problem.
All right, Matt, how much power do you guys run up there on those antennas?
Right, so each tower is carrying 20 kilowatts per tower. Right, so when you look at the transmitters, you know, it's one transmitter, but actually it's two. The left-hand side drives an east-west dipole, and the right-hand side drives that north-south dipole. So, and they can be operated totally independently, different frequencies. We can break that array up any way we want. We could have, you know, just the center 20 transmitters doing one frequency with the rest of the array doing something different. Of course, all of the polarization modes, we can do them all the modulation modes, we can do them all. We can do them all at the same time. So each half transmitter is putting 10,000 watts into its respective dipole for a total of 360 final power amplifiers putting out 3.6 million watts.
Oh my
So,
God.
so we start low level, microvolt level at the bottom of these transmitters. And, you know, these transmitters were made by Continental Electronics Corporation only for Gacona, Alaska. So when you come out into our array, almost everything that you see there is only found in Gacona. So when you're looking for parts, it's not like you have a bunch of vendors to go through. We only have a few vendors that we work very closely with because our controls are very unique. The actual configuration of the transmitters and the towers themselves, very unique. We actually worked with Continental down in Texas for many years and drop shipped about 35% of the parts for these transmitters directly to Texas. And we told their engineers down there that these components must be used. And of course, they had a little bit of a hard time because, you know, they are the RF engineer experts. And so, you know, having some people make suggestions or ask them for things, they had kind of a hard time at first. But after they worked with our group, they understood that really they're working with some of the best RF technologists in the world. So things really came together quite nicely.
Hey, Matt, one thing that we talked about on the phone this afternoon really interests me, and I think it'll interest the group. You know, light does strange things depending on how much power, the wavelength. What about radio waves? What kind of strange things happen when you take a radio wave and add an immense power, or maybe immense, you know, high frequency, low frequency? What are some of the strange effects that you find?
Yeah. Well, let me tell you. You know, when you have an electronically phase-controlled planar array, you can really do a lot of things that are not helpful. And that goes for any high-powered system. For instance, on Project Elf, we learned there are some things that you can and cannot do. So for that system, we installed antenna fault detectors with a very highly filtered high DC voltage. And then we also set up ground fault detectors where we monitored up to the 50th harmonic of the signals that we were generating so that we could have tight control and could shut down that system because, we were putting 150 amps of ELF out on those lines. We found that there are some things you cannot do. And when you're engineering, you're going forward, you're working with theoretical models, and then all of a sudden you have King Kong-sized components blowing up. It's a learning process. Now, with a phased array, electronically phase-controlled array like HAARP, there are certain things that you cannot do, right? We can, the bigger your aperture, it doesn't matter whether it's an optical aperture or an RF energy aperture. The bigger that aperture gets, the better your ability to focus that energy into a tight beam. So of course we can do that with 33 plus acres of array. We can focus a pencil beam, but we can break that up, have two different beams, one focal point, one broad, or any other way. But when you have an array like this, and now you want to steer it, so you're forming a beam. Say you do a left-hand spinning beam, but now you want to focus that into a tight energy column, a high energy density, and then steer it where you can rapidly take that thing off zenith, and in 4 microseconds or less, put that thing 30 degrees off zenith and rapidly point it around. There are things that burn up and can burn up. So throughout the engineering process, we found hot spots in the array. And that's just the way it is. When you've got a big array, you want everything to be symmetrical, your power levels. Even though you've got 360 power amplifiers out in that array, no two of them are doing the same thing at the same time. They're all a piece of the puzzle to make that big picture, whether it's a spinning left hand, a spinning right hand beam, a linear beam, or two different beams doing different things. So there was quite the learning curve with the software and the hardware, right? Because you got to make sure that your firmware and your software is doing precisely what you want. And of course, our chief physicist really put together the software and the control systems for this system. So we've got what's called the in-phase and quadrature control of the RF energy, meaning every 1/4 wavelength of the RF that we're driving into those transmitters, we have very tight control. So when we want to spin left hand or right hand, or we want to do a steering configuration where we can point this beam in a certain direction and keep all its energy focused there, there are some learning curves that you have. But nonetheless, we've gone through every possible mode of operation with this array, and it's pretty phenomenal. Now, when you look at an AM or an FM broadcast station, and you take a look at the specifications that they're required to follow under the FCC rules, they could never, ever operate with the specifications that were put on the HAARP facility. So one of our claims to fame is spectral purity. So in-band, odd-band harmonics, spurious noise levels, we have suppressed them to nothing, actually down to the point where it's barely measurable with the test equipment that we use. So we have the spectral purity, which really creates other problems that could arise when you have mixing going on within your amplifiers or different sections of your transmitters. Okay, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, that's all right. With all that power you're using, do you have restricted airspace over the top of your facility?
Yeah, one of the things from day one was HAARP will not interfere with anybody. And that goes for ham operators, that goes for aircraft, that goes for people calling. If they call and say, hey, I think there's something happening electrically in my house and it could be HAARP, we will look into that. But if a ham operator, say somebody up on the northwest coast of Alaska, calls and says, hey, I'm hearing some tones in my HF radio telephone. What we do is we shut down, verify that it's us. If we are interfering, we will shut down, change our operating characteristics, whether it's the carrier frequency or the modulation that we're using. We will verify it with the user that we're no longer interfering. Also with aircraft. It used to be that if an aircraft came within 5 nautical miles of the center of our array, we would just automatically shut down. Now with the university, it's not up to us, it's actually up to the pilots to avoid the array to the tune of 2.5 nautical miles. But we still have automated functions. We have a radar, aircraft alert radar. We have a ground-based traffic collision avoidance system, and we have the latest, greatest GPS-based aircraft surveillance, the ADS-B. So the post-processing of our radar and these other two surveillance signals is spectacular and actually controls the key line. So if an aircraft were to come to 2.5 nautical miles from the array, we would automatically key up. The experiment would keep running with no RF output. And then once the aircraft cleared the space, then it would automatically key down again.
Yeah.
So yeah, we operate on a not to interfere basis.
Amazing. Ham radio right now is experimenting with very, very low frequency. In fact, the FCC opened up the 1700 meter band, which requires about a 3,500 foot long wire antenna.
Right.
But it's only by invitation. You have to get permission to be there.
Yeah. Right,
Are you guys doing any very low frequency work?
No, not right now. You know, we have our listed bands of operation that we've got to stay within. Now, the thing, you know, with perturbing the ionosphere, many of the experiments that we like to do more towards solar maximum, not solar minimum. You know, so right now we're down at the bottom of solar cycle 24. And you'll see as the sunspot numbers start coming back up, as we get into solar cycle 2025, the envelope of the ionosphere grows, right? And so that gives us more of our bandwidth that we can use to actually interact with a thicker ionosphere. So as I had mentioned earlier, there are some conditions that have to be right. You know, if we want to do an optical experiment where we want to create aurora, well, obviously, it's got to be dark out. There can't be clouds, but the ionosphere can't collapse early either. So as we get into the colder months, into the fall and winter months, you'll see the rapid decay of the ionosphere as the sun goes down. So we don't get a lot of sun here in the winter anyhow. So those windows of opportunity for the science are diminished. But as we get closer to the next solar maximum, then our windows of opportunity also increase.
All right, well, I want to thank you for being with us here. Your friend, Christopher Fallon, please thank him for us. He's the one that set this up. He's our ham radio operator. And I said, Chris, why don't you send me a picture of Marty? So the picture he sent me was with your face blocked out, like it was, the government, standing next to Jesse Ventura. And he said, put this in your newsletter, see what the guys say. And I said, I wasn't going to bring up conspiracy theory, but you and I had such a good conversation this afternoon. How did the conspiracy theories all get their start?
Yeah, they all go back to Dr. Bernard Eastland, and he worked for ARCO. When the Air Force and the Navy were first looking for places to build a HAARP facility. And Bernard, I think he's still living down in Texas right now. But, you know, when engineers or scientists, many times when they have a great idea, before they build a prototype, they'll seek the patent. And so that's what Bernard did. He went for those patents in the 80s, the late 80s. And of course, nobody really paid much attention to them until they started building HAARP. So in late 92 and 93, when they were first getting the prototype antennas ordered and developed, there was a little bit of media. You know, there was, what was it? It was Popular Mechanics had something out. There might have been a few other news articles, but that was about it. But then in 97 and 98, when they grew it from 18 antennas to 48, well, then the conspiracy levels grew a little bit more. And then, of course, in 2004, 5, and 6, when we built out the whole thing, the conspiracy theorists just took off with new websites. And so it all goes back to Bernard saying, you know, hey, we can do power beaming, we can do weather modification, we can do mind control. So that stuff, all that stuff,
That's why
has
I didn't have
excited
radio.
me with Bernard's patents.
Matt, thank you, sir, Marty, thank you so much for
you're welcome.
being with us. I'm telling you, this was a great interview. And, and I wish you guys would talk to more ham radio places like this and talk about the conspiracy. You know, when you guys have been giving tours lately, a lot, and I think that pretty much takes care of the conspiracy theories.
Yeah, but you know, they don't go away totally. You know, there's people that they believe them, and no matter what you tell them, they're going to think they're true. So, yeah.
Well, back when I was in radio, we always had Art Bell on at night, and I used to have to do an advertisement for him. And once I cut an advertisement, I said, if you like really good scientific porn, listen to Art Bell. And it just about got me fired, but it was fun.
Well, hopefully we're going to try another moon bounce here too. I don't know if any of you guys were involved with that. It's probably been a decade since we did our last moon bounce, but you know, we sent out all QSL cards and everything else on that. So I think we'll probably be doing that again sometime as well.
Wow, that sounds great. Marty, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Oh,
They got the
Let's give Marty a big hand.
Yeah, they got the-